So today we're going to get all a baseline understanding of who the Soviet Union is, who we are, what we believe, and how that will ultimately lead to this thing called the Cold War. I've got two quotes. You guys had a reading last night to read a little bit from a first chapter of a book by a guy named John Lewis Gaddis. John Lewis Gaddis is a guy we're going to become much more familiar with. He's probably the preeminent American historian of the Cold War today. And he's been that since the 1980s. He's still working today. He's a guy that looks at the Cold War with all the things we knew about the Cold War in the 1980s and the 90s and now the 2000s. And he really is one of the most important members of a school of Cold War historiography called the post-revisionist and now post-Cold War school. We will talk later. Don't worry about it now. But basically, John Lewis Gaddis is able to use all the historical research from all those historians that are writing in the 50s and 60s and 70s before him. And then even more importantly, after 1991, he's got access to the Soviet, or more access to old Soviet documents than any historians would have had before. So as American historians go, John Lewis Gaddis is like the guy to look to get an understanding of the Cold War. And he wrote a book, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, called The Cold War, A New History. And it's an excellent book. It's a relatively quick read. You read some of it last night. It was relatively easy to read, right? Like, it doesn't read like a too wonky of a history book, I didn't think. Did you think? Maybe? I don't know. Okay, if you had the real book, you would have seen these two quotes at the outset of that book. The first one, there are now two great nations in the world which, starting from different points, seem to be advancing towards the same goal. The Russians and the Anglo-Americans. Each seem called by some secret design of providence one day to hold in its hands the destinies of half the world. And this was said by a guy named Alexis De Tocqueville in 1835. Anyone with any understanding of who Alexis De Tocqueville was? Yes, ma'am. He wrote a lot about the American economy in the 1800s, absolutely. Anyone know where he's from? He looks French. That's a pretty French name there. Yeah, he was a French guy that came to the United States in our earliest decades. He came to the United States and he wandered around the country looking, observing, and writing about it. And he wrote a book called Democracy in America where he commented on our political system, our economic system as well, and basically the workings of our nation. And it is seen by many as an important work because it is America by an outsider. Like a guy that would probably be impartial. Like he didn't come into the situation being a rah-rah American guy. He was a French subject who came to the United States and he looked at how we set ourselves up. And he obviously looks at the world in 1835 and sees the United States and sees Russia, and he can look into the future and imagine what they might one day become. And man, he was right? So 120 years later, we're going to see the United States and the Soviet Union as two superpowers, right, who are competing against each other in a global rivalry. Now, what might have made him think that this was going to be the case in the 1800s? What advantage does the Russian state and what advantage does the United States have in possibly being these two countries that will hold the destiny of the world in their hands? Yeah?
The U.S. has democracy and freedom, liberty, and then Russia is an autocracy, it's totalitarian, a repressive state, but it has lots and lots of peasants, soldiers.
Okay, so
both are expansionists.
both are expansionist, absolutely, and he's seeing that in the mid-1800s. Both have large population bases. Both have seemingly unlimited resources, right? And so it's maybe not hard to see or predict that these might one day be the countries that dominate the world. Much later, with the defeat of the Reich and the pending emergence of the Asiatic, the African, and perhaps the South American nationalisms, there will remain in the world only two great powers capable of confronting each other, the United States and Soviet Russia. The laws of both history and geography will compel that these two powers to a trial of strength, either military or in the fields of economics and ideology. These same laws make it inevitable that both powers should become enemies of Europe. And it is equally certain that both of these powers will sooner or later find it desirable to seek the support of the sole surviving great nation of Europe, the German people. And this was Adolf Hitler, right before the end of the war for Germany. So Adolf Hitler, obviously much closer to the current time, looks at a world and he sees the British Empire crumbling because the people of Asia and the people of Africa are going to demand their own nationalistic identity. So the British Empire will be gone. And he sees the United States rising out of World War II and the Soviet Union rising out of World War II as competing superpowers, right? And of course, Adolf Hitler wants to still have, despite their defeat in the Second World War, put Germany in a prominent place. That he says Germany will be the center of this. They will both compete, and they will both need the German people on their side. And lo and behold, when World War II comes to an end, the line that's drawn between Europe, between the Soviet sphere and between the American sphere that we're going to talk about for much of the next few weeks is right through the heart of Germany. Kevin?
Who wrote that quote down?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know.
I could never see Hitler writing down something where he admits defeat.
Yeah.
Until the end, he was still crazy about it.
Yeah, I don't know the origins of that. Maybe that's something fun that you can find out and tell us all. Awesome. I like giving more work to other people. All right, so this is where we end up by 1945, right? We know the Soviets win World War II. We know we win World War II. We know we've already talked about the wartime conferences, and there's the beginning of some disagreements as to how the world is going to look. Before we press too much further into the origins of the Cold War, though, I want to make sure we have all a good and sound, even understanding of who we are and who the Soviet Union was. The United States is a capitalist, democratic republic. And we should understand those three words. We are a capitalist, democratic republic. What do we think of when we think of capitalism? Money, sure. It's an important part of it, yes.
Free markets, little state control.
Free markets, little state control. Good, good, good. Does anybody know what capital actually is in terms of economics? What's that? No, that's like your income, I guess I would say, yes? It could be goods. Could be goods and services. Yeah?
It's just money that you use to start businesses, trade.
Yeah.
What makes the economy move.
It is anything. It could be money. It could be resources. It could be us. Anything that could be used to make something more valuable. All right? So, for example, you guys ever hear of a guy named Andrew Carnegie?
Yes.
All right, so Andrew Carnegie, who is he?
Steel,
Okay, well, who says Carnegie? See, yeah, I've always said Andrew Carnegie, and then you hear some people say Andrew Carnegie. I like Carnegie. Like, no one dreams of playing Carnegie or Carnegie Hall in New York, right? It's Carnegie Hall. Who says Carnegie?
No, we watched the videos like 8th grade.
Yeah.
The guy in the video was like, is it Carnegie or Carnegie?
Oh, he thought he was funny. Okay, I got you. I say Carnegie. Hey, but if it's a potato thing. Go for it. Do what you want to do. So Carnegie made his money where? Steel. Very good. Andrew Carnegie is the guy that founded the U.S. Steel Corporation out of Pittsburgh, right? That's why the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're not a bunch of thieves. What? They're not thieves, right? And like the logo for the Pittsburgh Steelers Football Club is the logo for the U.S. Steel Corporation, the same thing. Just like the Green Bay Packers. Meat Packers in Green Bay. And the Detroit Lions because of all the wild lions that run around the Detroit. No, that makes no sense. But anyway, Andrew Carnegie, when he was a young man, we're getting so far off topic, but I will bring it back. Andrew Carnegie when he was a young man, he had a job as a telegraph operator. He was the guy that was doing the dots, and the dashes to send Morse code messages on telegraphs, right? And his boss gave him an opportunity. He said, Andrew, how would you like to give some small portion of your earnings to me to invest in these railroads? And Andrew Carnegie's like, what? Give it to me. We'll invest it in these railroads going up out west, and we will get our money back along with some interest. We will earn more money on our investment. And Carnegie was young, and he listened to this guy, and he said, okay, fine, let's do this. And within a certain amount of time, I don't know, weeks, months, whatever, his boss came back and gave him some cash and said, here's your dividend. He earned some earnings on the profits of this railroad company that he invested in. And Andrew Carnegie was like, whoa, eureka, I have found it. The goose that lays the golden egg. Like he figured out that he could now, for the first time in his life, because we all know that we can get paid from like doing work. You work for a few hours at Wendy's and you make $21, right? Yeah. But you only get to keep like 14 of it, right? So you work, you make money based on the time that you put in. Andrew Carnegie long knew that. He made money by doing the dots, dots, and the dashes, dashes in the telegraph office. And he got paid based on the time that he served. But now, after this investment, he actually makes money and he had to do nothing for it. His money right now is earning money on its own, right? He is turning his initial investment into a larger amount of wealth, all right? That's what we would call a capital investment, right? He's giving it to a company so they can grow richer and he can reap the fruits of those rewards. There's also human capital, like you guys are all getting ready to do this. You've done it for the last few years at our school. You're going to go to a university to hopefully gain new skills or hone your talents and abilities so you could earn more money than you could otherwise earn right now, right? Or there's like capital in resources. If you dig a bunch of iron out of the earth, right, it's got a certain value to it. But if you tinker with that iron and whatever, I don't know the science, extract the oxygen or whatever, and turn that iron into steel, it's now much more valuable. Or if you take that steel and turn that into tools or parts for tools, now it's even more valuable than the steel was originally. That's the idea of capital, right? A capitalist state builds on this. It says we can make more wealth than we currently have now. And we can make it by maybe investing in ourselves or enhancing our education. And it will best work. We can grow our wealth the most if the government keeps out. If individuals on their own can decide for themselves what they want to produce, how they want to produce it, what they want to consume, or how much they want to consume of whatever it is. Keep the government out. In 1770, this had long existed, but in 1776, a guy named Adam Smith wrote a book called On the Wealth of Nations, where he kind of put pen to paper and like laid all this out. And Adam Smith said that everybody will be better off, like all people will be better off, if we allow what he called the invisible hand of the marketplace to dictate how economies work. Why is your Snickers bar $1 at the gas station? Why doesn't that clerk charge $5 for it? Does anybody have to tell that clerk he's not allowed to charge $5 for a Snickers bar? No. He could try it. And what would he realize if he charged $5 for a Snickers bar? No one's going to buy it. And then he's going to be stuck with all these Snickers bars that no one wants. So he's got to lower the price on that, right? And he brings that price down, and eventually they're going to start selling because consumers now say, I'll buy that Snickers bar for $1, right? That no one has to tell him to do that. That's the invisible hand of the marketplace. And so this becomes the idea of capitalism. Let individuals make their own choices. Let individuals start their own business. Let individuals decide how they want to run their business. If they do it well, it succeeds. If they do it poorly, it fails. Let it happen, all right? It's also referred to as laissez-faire economics. Like, what's that? Yeah. Yes. Oh, no. Okay, cool. So that's capitalism. Then we are, pardon me, one more thing. In a capitalist society, we kind of have this idea that individuals will work hard because they have the promise of reward for their hard work. You work hard as an individual because you will receive an individual reward. All of you have put yourself through 3.5 years at this school because you feel that there's maybe some benefit that could come down the road for it, right? We work hard because we can get paid more down the road. It's kind of a part of a Protestant work ethic coming in there, yeah. All right, we are also a democratic republic. So capitalism kind of refers to the economic side of the state that we are. Then we're a democratic republic. Democratic republic, we live in it, we know what it is. What is it? We vote for politicians. Yes, Kevin? We elect representatives, we vote for representatives that set the way our country is going to work. We get to decide. If we don't like the people that are currently making the rules, we change them. We like to think it works that easily, but it doesn't always. So we're a capitalist democratic republic. We also, in our democratic republic, we are champions of individual rights. And notice there's a lot of individualism here. We even talked about this at the beginning of the class, right? When we might put our grandparents in homes down the road or something like this because, well, we've got our own lives that we have to take care of, and I'm too busy and I can't be there all the time, right? Because we're kind of worried about ourselves. We're a very individualistic society. We champion individual rights. You have the right to speech. You have the right to practice the religion of your choice or not practice religion if it is your choice. You have the right to petition our government if you have a problem with something that they're doing. You have a free press in our society. All these things go along with our capitalist democratic republic. The Soviet Union is a communist one-party state, or was a communist one-party state. Now, communism, what comes to your mind when you hear that word? Sharing, okay. That is the most positive word that first came to someone's mind of my 3 classes now. Yes?
State control of all factories, businesses.
Okay, state control of factories and businesses. Excellent. Anything else come to your mind? Dictatorship, okay. Yes, sir?
Collective farming.
Okay, collective agriculture, collective farming, all these things are there. Communism is born long after capitalism was a thing. Guys, capitalism has always been in existence. There hasn't been a time in human history where there wasn't a guy that grew some food and tried to go to a market to sell it to other people. That's in its purest form, capitalism, right? He sets how much he wants to sell stuff for. The people buy it or they don't buy it, and he adjusts his price based on that. Capitalism has long been there. Communism is born in the 19th century. And we're going to look at this gentleman and credit him with the origins of these ideas. This is Karl Marx. Very good. Karl Marx is a German in the mid-19th century. And we need to remember, because the problem of students of history, right? Remember how we talked about how today Neville Chamberlain from Britain before World War II, how history doesn't look too fondly onto him because we see him as the guy that allowed Adolf Hitler to do what he did, the great appeaser, right? But remember, Neville Chamberlain in 1938 couldn't have known what was to come down the road. And in fact, the people of 1938 were largely supportive of Neville Chamberlain. Well, we have to remember Karl Marx, too, in the 1840s and what he's living with and what he's looking at around him. And also the things that Karl Marx does not know. Karl Marx doesn't know that the Soviet Union will ever exist. Karl Marx doesn't know that communism, as the way it's going to be applied, will absolutely fail. Karl Marx doesn't know that capitalist nations like us will start to impose our own regulations on our system, right? Are we a purely capitalist nation today? In what ways are we not? Okay, we have a government old age pension that we give to people. What else? We have public education. We have, what did you say? Yeah, we don't have a private military. We have a government-funded military. We have government funding fire departments and police departments, absolutely. What about individual businesses? Can a business owner pay his workers anything he wants to pay them? No. Within some degree he can, but he must meet minimum wages, right? Can he work his employees for as hard as he wants to work them, as long as he wants to work them? Not really. You guys have all kinds of restrictions on you, right? Yeah, like what are some child labor laws that we now have in our society that prohibit you from maybe working the amount that you want to? What are the rules?
Oh, well, for us, we have to take, like, work more than 5 hours. People 17 and under have to take a 30-minute break.
Okay, you get breaks that are by law given to you. And if they're not, your employer can get themselves into some trouble. You're only allowed to work, what is it, 5 hours on a school night?
I don't know if they care really about school nights, but, like, for us, it's just that we have to have, like, a certain amount of, like, breaks.
Okay, I think they do care about school nights too. Yeah. So I think there's a 5-hour thing. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you can't work past a certain amount of time. You can never be alone in your workplace, especially if there's a cash business. If you work at Arby's, you are not allowed under 18 years old to work the slicer. You can work registers, but you can't. If you work at McDonald's, you can't work the fry machine or the hamburger grill because you're kids and you'd like burn your hands off, and they're not allowed to do that. So our government has imposed on itself all kinds of restrictions and regulations to businesses. That's not the invisible hand of the marketplace dictating everything. Right? That is the federal government imposing change. He doesn't know that the United States is eventually going to do that on its own, right? And in large part in response to some of the demands made by people that support him. He can't predict that, right? What does he know? He's looking at a world, a Germany, an industrialized state, going through the Industrial Revolution, and what does he see around him? Yeah. He sees poor people suffering. The majority of people are poor, and the majority of them are tremendously suffering. Yes?
He sees the industrial bourgeoisie oppressing the proletariat.
Kevin's throwing some big words at us. The industrial bourgeoisie, he says. Who are the bourgeoisie? The rich owners of the factories, right? Bourgeois, B-O-U-R-G-E-O-I-S-I-E, I believe. Bourgeoisie. Yeah, something like that. That comes from the root of the root word there is just the same word as like in Karl Marx's own Germany, burger. What's a burger? It's a city dweller. It's like a city guy, all right? A burger, like Hamburg or Pittsburgh, right? Burg is a city. So like Hamburg, a hamburger, it's not something you eat, it's a guy that lives in Hamburg, Germany, right? So bourgeois is just the French word for that. And so bourgeoisie is just this term, this adjective now used to represent this city dweller that might dress in his nice clothes and his modern styles, right? Like think Fifth Avenue in New York or whatever. That they're just a cut above the rest. They're the business ownership class. And in Karl Marx's mind, he sees those owners living in the lap of luxury, far beyond the means of the average person. And the average people, or the poor people, they're working for the factory owners. What does he call those? Very good, proletariat. So you've got a mass of proletariat being dominated by these few bourgeoisie. And in Karl Marx's mind, and he writes this in a book he calls the Communist Manifesto, in Karl Marx's mind, the history of the world, he says, is a history of class struggle. Not a racial thing necessarily, it's a class thing. And the powerful, the wealthy, take advantage of the weak and the poor throughout all of human history. And he goes back to the sense of the Neolithic Revolution, and we started like farming, right? Who were the powerful? The people that owned the land. And they exploited the people that worked the land. And then he can fast forward all the way to the 19th century and in a new industrial society as more and more people are leaving farms and going to work in big cities, and he sees the same things. He sees powerful industrialists, a bourgeois class that is exploiting the workers. And he says that the next step in human evolution is going to be those workers of the world, wherever they are. The communist ideal doesn't see national boundaries as being significant. That the workers of the world will one day be so fed up with their lot in life that they will rise up together and they will recognize that they know how to run the factory. They know how to make the textiles. They know how to make the machines. And they probably know better than the guy that is watching them from his high office. and that they will one day rise up and overthrow the ownership class, and they will take over the factories for themselves. And then they will run those factories as they see fit, and they will share in the profits of that factory. Why should one guy get it all, and then these guys get scraps? They should share it all. That's what Karl Marx is advocating. Who does this resonate with? Yeah, the poor people. Wait, whoa, this sounds pretty good, right? Who does this freak out? The business owners, the guys that run the businesses, right? And so naturally, the United States of America, a country in the 19th century that's having tremendous economic growth, we're going to have a ownership class in America that is very nervous about this, very frightened of these ideas. And we're going to see very early on that the United States is going to have some backlash against socialists or communists, people that support Karl Marx's ideas. Fast forward all the way to 1918, the end of World War I. The United States will actually, along with Britain and France, the United States will actually enter into the Russian Civil War after the Russian Revolution. Yeah, and Germany and Japan were there too. We will actually enter into this war in hopes of defeating the communist Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union. Our help doesn't ultimately help because the white armies that are opposing the red armies are so divided themselves. The Bolsheviks ultimately win. But from very early on, we are not supportive of this guy's idea because we feel that this guy's ideas are everything that our nation is against, like free enterprise and free business and individual choice. So that's communism. The communism of the Soviet Union is trying to set up, in a way, goes against what Karl Marx advocated for. Karl Marx said you had to have an agricultural state that would then become an industrial state, and then could be a communist utopia. The Soviet Union was an agricultural state, kind of missed the whole industrial development. The Soviet Union was slow to industrialize. And by the time the Soviet Union exists, they have a very small industrial class. They're still mostly poor peasants, agricultural workers. So in its earliest years, the Soviet Union under this guy named Vladimir Lenin, in its earliest years, it's going to make a slow move towards this communism, this communist state. It won't completely eliminate free enterprise or private ownership. But after Lenin dies and Joseph Stalin arises out of this power struggle, we get the implementation, and you guys can remember back when Dr. Reddish talked to you about this, of what is known as Stalinism. Stalin's take on Marxism. If Marx says you must be a agricultural society and then an industrialized society to be a successful communist state, Joseph Stalin is going to push fast forward on the development of the Soviet Union to becoming a pure communist state. Stalin will move in the 1930s to collectivize agriculture across the Soviet Union. You might own a farm, you own a farm, you own a farm, you own a farm. But under the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, all of those private lands will be taken by the federal government. And then the government will tell you what's going to be produced on that land. The government will take the fruits of your labor, and then the government will redistribute it as it sees fit. That's known as collectivization of agriculture. Under Stalin's collectivization plans, millions will perish. Yes, sir? Because, Kevin, what do you want to say?
Because they took a lot of that, like farm produce and stuff, and they sold it to Europe for like industrial machinery and money.
Yeah, and taking a lot of agricultural workers and pulling them off of the farms to basically force them to become industrial workers as well. So as this food is being taken from the farmers that used to grow it. Remember, a farmer would grow his own food and keep it and sell it for other things that he needed. Well, now he's losing everything. We're going to have mass starvation and famine in the Soviet Union, especially in the Ukraine in the 1930s. Maybe numbers range, but 2 to 6 million people possibly dying in the Ukraine due to these forced famines orchestrated by the Soviet Union. Yeah?
Did famine occur just because of unequal sharing, or was there not?
Absolutely, yeah. The produce, with the wheat, for example, was taken by the government. The government would turn around and send it to cities or send it outside of the country, and the people were left with nothing. The people that were growing the food were left with very little. So yeah, just not enough. Also, as a part of the Stalinist system, he would institute a series of 5-year plans. And these 5-year plans were meant to rapidly industrialize the Soviet state. If you needed to be an industrial economy to be a pure communist state, Stalin would force the Soviet Union to be an industrial economy. So these 5-year plans would absolutely dramatically increase production and industry in the Soviet Union. The best evidence for that is what the Soviet Union was able to do in the Second World War. The fact that they, throughout the war, could continue to produce weapons of war for their armies and new planes and new tanks is a testament to the growth that they did in the pre-war years. Another aspect of Stalinism you guys remember from Dr. Reddish is the terror that he instilled on his populace. We talked about the Great Purge of the 1930s, where any political opponents that were seen as challenging Stalin's authority would be put on show trials, court cases where you knew what the outcome was before the case even started. They'd be found guilty, and in many cases they'd be executed. In other cases, they'd be sent to prison camps, known as gulags in the Soviet Union. And in addition to literally eliminating the human, like in this picture, here's a guy named Kirov, who was just seen as a political rival of, or a challenger to Joseph Stalin, he would be absolutely eliminated from all existence. So scrubbing him out of even photographs. No, that's not Beria. It's a guy named Kirov, and I don't know much about him now. So anyway, we've got this institution of Stalinism. Stalin being kind of paranoid, thinking that everybody's going to be out to get him, so he must eliminate political opponents, creating a state of terror that shows everybody in the state what will happen if you don't follow the will of the state. This is the communist government of the Soviet Union. It's also a one-party state, obviously. There is no democracy. You have one communist party. There's no choice that the people would have as to who is going to rule them. Following World War II, we have the Soviet Union and the United States that are so different from each other, but they desire the same thing at the end of World War II. You guys did the Gaddis reading last night. What do they both desire? Say it out loud, Amanda. Security. Yeah. They just want to be safe. It's the same thing that every individual or every state has ever wanted throughout human history, right? I just want to be safe. I want to live to the next day. But we see that the Soviet Union and the United States see security coming from different means, right? Where does the United States get its security from? I'm hearing a few things. What's that? What's that? It's okay. We get literal security from our location, right? But like we've got an ocean between us and Europe. We have an ocean between us and Asia. But what did World War II prove to us about that security that the oceans can provide? Airplanes and aircraft carriers can really neutralize the security that the oceans once gave us. So we need more than just oceans in this new post-World War II world. What can make us secure? You guys read it last night. Yes, sir?
Nuclear deterrent.
Okay, literally nuclear weapons. But let's not get that aggressive yet. Ideologically, how does the United States see a world that could actually get along with each other and work much better and avoid future wars? Yeah? ideology. Yeah, okay. By trying to spread American ideology of democracy and free markets that could have a world that would be like more free. We like that. Who's maybe the first guy that had those ideas? Didn't work for him, but he had those ideas. First American president that would try to spread ideas of American democracy. Who? Woodrow Wilson, yeah. His 14 points, most of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points was about America spreading American ideals. Self-determination, sovereignty of individual nations, open seas for free trade between nations, limited trade barriers. And then what was the most important part of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points? The creation of a League of Nations, right? And a League of Nations provides what is known as collective security. That is an IB buzz phrase. You need to know the idea of collective security. That every nation could stand together to provide the security for every nation. Now, the problem, of course, with the League of Nations was what? Yes, Kevin?
No bite with its heart.
Okay, it had good ideals, but no enforcement. And what did the richest country in the world decide with regard to the League of Nations? We didn't join it, right? Our idea never ratified by the American Senate. So maybe the League of Nations could have had more bark had the United States been a part of it. But at the start of World War II, Franklin Roosevelt wants to assure that this new war, that this war that's coming up, is going to be about the principles that we thought the last war was going to be about. And where does Franklin Roosevelt assure that this war will be about those principles? It's not going to be a land grab. And this comes where? Where do we get Churchill to agree to this? The Atlantic Charter in August of 1941. This statement of war principles. That this will not be a war fought to get England more land for its empire. That this will be a war fought to truly spread democracy. Right? This will be a war fought to open markets rather than have them be further closed. Yay! The problem is, when we fight this war, we have to ally ourselves. We don't necessarily choose it. Germany chooses it, right? 6 months in 1941, when Germany in June of 41 invades the Soviet Union, and Germany in December of 41 declares war on the United States. Germany puts the United States and the Soviet Union together as allies, right? We ally ourselves with the least autocratic nation in the world. I meant most. Thank you. Write down what I mean, not what I say. We ally ourselves with the most autocratic nation in the world. So we can't easily say that we are fighting a war to spread democracy as we are allied with the least democratic state in the world. So we know that this is going to be a problem once the world ends. But as the war comes to an end, I didn't mean world ends, I meant war ends. I'm obviously getting to the end of my ability to use words properly. As the war is going to come to an end, you get the United States still desiring security in a post-war world. We see that security coming through collective security. And of course, even though we should have been founding members of the League of Nations and we didn't, what do we set up during the Second World War? The United Nations. And are we going to join that? Absolutely. We will never, ever again turn and be isolationist. To this point, today, right now, we are not right now we're sending people to Iraq again to try to wage battle against ISIS. We are not militarily or politically isolationist, and we haven't been since World War II. And then peace can come through more free markets and open trade. Where does the Soviet Union get its security from? Yeah.
Buffer state between it and Germany.
Very good. The Soviet Union is a land-based state. They see security for themselves coming through more land. Soviet Union has reason to want land for security. What has now happened to the Soviet Union twice in the last 25 years?
Been invaded by Germany.
Been invaded twice by Germany. back in 1914 and now again in 1941. So the Soviet Union, fool me once, shame on you or me. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? Well, fool me 3 times, I've got to be a real idiot. So the Soviet Union wants to gain land. So if Germany ever does think of invading the Soviet Union again, they would be doing it through territory that can be controlled by the Soviets, but it's not Soviet land. And the hope is, if the Soviet Union can take over new land, or at least have governments in Poland and East Germany, and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania, or maybe later in West Germany or in France and in Italy, and maybe even in England, if they can have governments that are of similar ideologies, that they would never threaten the Soviet Union as being like the home base of the communist world. So security for the Soviets comes through land. Security for the Americans comes through openness, right? And free trade and democracies. And we can see how these two things can't coexist at the same time. And so we're going to have an ideological war for the next 45 years. At the end of World War II, the United States has the absolute advantage when it comes to our economy. We have by far the biggest economy in the world. Remember we said at the end of World War II, the United States is producing half of the global production. Now, is that because we're awesome? Partly, maybe. What's another reason that we are allowed to have this booming economy even at the end of World War II? Yeah. The war is not fought in our cities. Our industry and our agriculture is not ravaged by World War II like Europe's was. So we've got the economic strength. The Soviet Union, at the end of the war, they have what we could call the geopolitical advantage. They are here. They are literally in Eastern Europe. Their army, their Red Army, like the game of Risk, is in every country that they've conquered. Where is our army? Still in Germany, but where does our army have to go? Why does our army have to go home? Who doesn't want them to stay? The people. So what? We're a democracy. American moms and dads want their American boys to be able to come home after the war. We were told we were going to fight a war against Germany and Japan, and we've now won. Let's bring our guys home now. And war is expensive, right? There's a tremendous tax burden put on the American people. You guys know at the peak, right now, do you know what the richest Americans pay as a percentage of their income for taxes? Like what's the top margin for taxes in the United States? Yeah, it's around 40%, like 39% now. It went up. Bush tax cuts expired for the wealthiest Americans. So about 39% and change, I believe it is. You guys know what it was during the peak of World War II? I think it was like 90. Yeah, wealthiest Americans were paying about 90% of their income, 90% of their top earnings to federal income taxes. We wanted to bring those numbers down after the war because we're a democracy and we have to respond to our populace. Now, do you think Russian moms want their boys to come home? Yeah, they're just like our moms. But they don't get to vote like our moms do. Our moms get to vote in 1946, right? In 47 to 48. They don't get to vote. They don't have a say. So the Soviet army is still in Eastern Europe. Can't do anything about that. And our boys are going to have to come home. So we have an economic advantage. The Soviets absolutely have a geopolitical advantage. But then we have a trump card in 1945. A trump card that will allow us to bring most of our soldiers home while still defending Western Europe. And that is, we've got the atomic bomb and they don't. But unfortunately for the United States, the Soviet spies had infiltrated the Manhattan Project, and within a few short years, the Soviets will have their own bomb. But that is a story for another day.